From the moment humanity began telling stories, there has always been one figure who sat at the edge of the firelight, half feared, half forgotten, and always watching with eyes that refused to lower Lilith. For thousands of years, she has been whispered about, but never fully understood. Blamed, but never given a chance to speak, turned into a demon by some, and worshipped as a goddess by others. Her name resurfaces in dusty tablets, forbidden manuscripts, medieval paintings, occult rituals, feminist manifestos, and even modern astrology. Yet every version contradicts the next, as if each era needed to remake her into its own shadow. And perhaps that is precisely the point. Lilith is not a character in a story. She is a mirror, held up to whatever a society fears most. The ancient Sumerians shaped her into a storm spirit. The rabbis sculpted her into Adam's rebellious first wife. Medieval Christianity turned her into a child-stealing monster, while modern spirituality reframes her as the embodiment of the unbroken feminine will. But who is she really? Why does her name ignite both dread and fascination? And what does it reveal about us that one woman could be rewritten so violently across history? In the next 30 minutes, we are not here to simply retell myths you've heard versions of those before. We are here to confront the psychological machinery behind them, to examine why certain archetypes were elevated and others buried, why some feminine figures were crowned queens, while others were condemned as demons. We will ask the uncomfortable questions religions avoided, the symbolic questions scholars rarely touch, and the spiritual questions that echo through the subconscious. What happens when a woman refuses to be controlled? What happens when the feminine refuses to shrink? What happens when the monster refuses to die? Lilith stands at the crossroads of mythology, theology, psychology, sexuality, and power. And each discipline claims a different version of her. But beneath all the layers, beneath the fear, the propaganda, the demon masks, the goddess crowns, there is a truth that has survived longer than any scripture. When a figure is hated this deeply and remembered this vividly, it is rarely because she is evil. It is because she is dangerous. Dangerous to structures that rely on obedience, conformity, and silence. And so today, we will peel back every layer. We will track her from the deserts of Mesopotamia to the halls of medieval demonologists, from the Kabbalistic tree of death to modern occultism, from patriarchal fears to feminine liberation. By the end of this journey, you will know why Lilith was never allowed to fade, and why her story might matter more now than ever before. Long before religious doctrines hardened, long before theologians decided who counted as holy and who counted as heretical. Lilith's name was already drifting through the sands of Mesopotamia, like a shadow looking for a body. The earliest traces of her come not from the Bible, not from Jewish folklore, but from Sumer, one of the very first civilizations humanity ever built. There she appears as Lilith, a spirit associated with the desert winds, the night, and the liminal places where human control dissolves. These were not necessarily demons in the modern sense. They were forces of nature, personified archetypes, given shape so the human mind could understand the untamable. But as empires rose and patriarchal systems solidified, the story shifted. By the time we reach the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, a mysterious female figure called Lilith nests in the sacred Hulupu tree, haunting the hero's path, a symbol of wild feminine energy, refusing domestication. This is the first clue Lilith emerges whenever men try to impose order on what cannot be owned. When thousands of years later, the alphabet of Ben Sira introduced the idea of Lilith as Adam's first wife, refusing to lie beneath him because she was created from the same earth. It wasn't merely mythology, It was a coded social warning. A woman who claims equality must be punished within the story, so she cannot become a model for others in the real world. The text accuses her of fleeing Eden and mating with demons, a conveniently dramatic punishment that transforms das independence into monstrosity. But ask yourself, why would an early religious writer invent such an elaborate myth just to explain the existence of demons? Why focus so obsessively on the idea of a woman refusing obedience? Why cling to the detail of her flying away? A woman who escapes the boundaries men set for her. It becomes clear that Lilith's demonization served a psychological and political purpose. Her refusal to submit was too dangerous to remain neutral. And so, she became a vessel for every fear of uncontrolled femininity. Childbirth without permission. Sexuality without male oversight. Choice without consequence. Yet the contradictions in early texts reveal something deeper. Some ancient amulets depict Lilith not as a monster, but as a powerful winged guardian, suggesting that she was not universally hated. In some traditions, she was feared, yes, but also respected. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, fragments describe female night spirits similar to Lilith, but their role is ambiguous, neither purely evil nor purely divine. And then we stumble upon a striking detail. The canonical Hebrew Bible never actually mentions her name. A figure this infamous, this supposedly dangerous, is entirely absent from the official scripture. That silence is its own kind of confession. If Lilith was so central to demonology, why omit her? Unless she was inconvenient? Unless her story was too politically charged, too destabilizing, too revealing? When we follow the timeline, a pattern becomes obvious. The more patriarchal a society became, the darker Lilith's image grew. She evolves from neutral spirit, dangerous seductress, child-stealing demon, only as male-dominated religious systems tighten control. This is not the evolution of a myth. It is the evolution of a fear. Lilith became the embodiment of the feminine force that refuses to be tamed sexuality, not controlled motherhood, not dictated identity, not assigned. And in that sense, she is less a character and more a symbol, a litmus test for what a culture believes women can or cannot be. Whenever you trace a myth back far enough, you expose the machinery behind it. And in the case of Lilith, the machinery is unmistakable. She became a demon not because she was evil, but because she was equal. And equality in the ancient world was the most frightening power a woman could wield. If Part 1 revealed how Lilith's earliest stories were shaped by fear, then Part 2 forces us to confront what that fear was actually about. Because beneath every accusation, every monstrous illustration, every whispered warning about her seduction and danger is a single uncomfortable truth. Lilith represents the parts of the feminine that patriarchal systems could not absorb, could not tame, and could not kill. So they tried to bury them under centuries of demon masks. To understand this, we must strip away the theological varnish and turn to something older and far more primal, the universal archetype of the forbidden feminine. Across cultures, there exists a recurring pattern whenever a goddess, spirit, or woman embodies raw autonomy, especially sexual autonomy. She becomes a threat. Lilith is not an exception to this pattern. She is its most distilled expression. Compare her to Kali, the Hindu goddess who wears skulls as garlands and dances on the bodies of men, not because she hates them, but because she embodies unfiltered creative destruction. Compare her to Hecate, guardian of crossroads, whose power came not from obedience, but from her refusal to belong to any single world, neither mortal nor divine one. Compare her to Tiamat, the Mesopotamian mother of creation, who was cut down by a rising masculine pantheon. In every case, the feminine, that cannot be controlled, becomes rebranded as monstrous. And so, Lilith's danger begins to look strikingly familiar. She was dangerous only because she lived outside male permission. Her sexuality was self-directed, her power self-contained, her identity self-defined. No man owned her, no institution framed her, no scripture successfully caged her. And that is precisely why religious writers felt compelled to demonize her, because a woman who belongs to no one destabilizes the entire foundation of patriarchal order. But if we go deeper, we uncover a psychological layer that religious narratives never intended us to see. In Jungian terms, Lilith is the personification of the shadow feminine, the aspects of womanhood that society represses until they erupt in distorted forms, not because they are evil, but because they have been exiled. Whenever a culture suppresses female desire, independence, or spiritual authority, those energies do not disappear. They migrate into the unconscious, where they grow teeth. Lilith becomes the symbolic eruption of everything a society tried to push down. Her myths are mirrors, not warnings. And what they reflect is this: the more violently a culture suppresses the feminine, the more violently it imagines her retaliation. Yet in this imagined retaliation lies a contradiction worth noticing. Why do men throughout history fantasize about the very female demons they claim to fear? The medieval church portrayed Lilith as a night seductress, stealing into men's dreams. Yet these depictions say more about male anxiety than female malice. She is the embodiment of desire. Men cannot control the manifestation of temptation they project onto the feminine, so they can avoid confronting their own impulses. In this sense, Lilith becomes the scapegoat for male weakness, not female wickedness. But here is the twist: because she represents autonomy instead of obedience. Lilith also becomes a symbol of empowerment for women who discover her. Every woman who has been told to stay silent, stay small, stay obedient recognizes something of herself in Lilith's defiance. And that recognition is dangerous not to society as a whole, but to any system built on controlling women. The forbidden feminine is not a cultural flaw. It is a cultural truth that refuses to disappear, no matter how many thousands of years its icons are demonized. Lilith stands as proof. Her story did not survive because she was hated. It survived because she was needed as a symbol of the feminine that refuses erasure, refuses distortion, refuses to die. And that, more than any myth, is what makes her truly powerful. To understand how Lilith transformed from a neutral spirit into one of history's most vilified feminine figures, we must shift our focus from mythology to machinery, from the stories themselves to the systems that manipulated them. Demonization is never random. It is always strategic. And in Lilith's case, the strategy was brutally efficient. As ancient societies evolved into rigid patriarchal structures, controlling women became synonymous with maintaining order, lineage, and political stability. Religion, far from being a neutral spiritual guide, was one of the most powerful tools in this control system. When church fathers, rabbis, and lawmakers realized that a mythic woman who refused male authority posed a symbolic threat to the social hierarchy, they did not debate her, they destroyed her. The medieval church perfected this process. Lilith became the exemplar of what happens when a woman resists. She was rebranded as a seductive predator, a child killer, a corrupter of men, a destroyer of families. This transformation was not about theology. It was about behavior modification. If you make independence synonymous with evil, women will fear freedom. If you make submission synonymous with holiness, they will police themselves. And so Lilith's story becomes a kind of ideological weapon, one that taught mothers to fear their own instincts, taught men to fear unruly desire, and taught society to equate control with safety. But the propaganda didn't stop there. Medieval demonologists' figures, who were essentially political enforcers disguised as scholars, commissioned and circulated artwork portraying Lilith as a hybrid creature, part woman, part serpent, part bird of prey. These images were not meant to reflect mythology. They were meant to shock, to imprint fear, to replace nuanced interpretation with visceral disgust. A feminine figure with wings symbolized freedom, so they twisted her wings into instruments of predation. A woman's sexual agency symbolized autonomy, so they sexualized her and then punished her for it. Even the accusation that Lilith stole newborn babies was not random. It was crafted to terrify mothers into conformity. The message was clear. Stray from sanctioned behavior, and you risk the wrath of the world's most notorious female demon. But ask a sharper question: if Lilith was so evil, why did so many men across history obsess over her? Why did Jewish mystics explore her duality? Why did medieval monks sketch her with such detail and fascination? Why did occultists try to summon her, not banish her? The answer is simple. Lilith represented something that institutional religion could not control: raw, unmediated, ungoverned feminine power. And power that cannot be governed must be demonized. Throughout history, demonization has always been a tool for protecting the ruling paradigm. New gods demonize old gods. New rulers demonize old rituals. New social orders demonize old freedoms. Lilith's fate is the inevitable outcome of this pattern. As patriarchal authority crystallized, a woman who refused hierarchy became a symbolic liability. Too inspiring to ignore, too rebellious to permit, too powerful to leave unnamed. So they exiled her to the margins of scripture, to the footnotes of folklore, to the nightmares of children. But exile is not erasure. Her demonization was so exaggerated, so obsessive, that it ultimately had the opposite effect. It immortalized her. The very systems that tried to silence her ended up preserving her memory in every warning, every sermon, every carved image meant to instill fear. And because fear remembers better than love. Lilith survived, carried through time, not as a demon, but as the shadow of a society terrified of what it cannot control. When mainstream religion pushed Lilith into the shadows did what they always do. They claimed her. And it is inside these shadows, in the forbidden manuscripts, the midnight rituals, the secret societies, and the mystical branches of Kabbalah, that Lilith took on a form far more complex than any church-approved monster. In the occult world, Lilith is not merely a demon. She is an initiator, a challenger, a gatekeeper of truths that polite society pretended did not exist. Her story shifts from one of punishment to one of power. The Kabbalists, for example, placed her not in hell, but in the Qliphoth, the shadow tree beneath the tree of life, a realm not of evil, but of raw, unfiltered potential, the chaotic energies that precede creation itself. In this cosmology, Lilith becomes the queen of the night consort of Samael, the fallen angel of severity and hidden wisdom. Their union is not romantic. It is symbolic, the merging of suppressed forces within the human psyche. To the mystic, Lilith represents what must be confronted before self-mastery is possible: desire, autonomy, rebellion, and the fearlessness required to break internal and external chains. This is why occult traditions do not worship her. They work with her, or rather, they work with the aspects of the self she embodies. But here is the paradox. The same qualities that terrified patriarchal religions became sources of empowerment within esoteric circles. Where the church saw seduction, occultists saw sovereignty. Where ancient rabbis saw defiance, Kabbalists saw liberation from imposed order. Where medieval demonologists saw chaos, magicians saw the raw clay of transformation. Yet the occult portrayal of Lilith is not purely flattering. Some grimoires describe her as the force that exposes the seeker's illusions, stripping away false piety and spiritual arrogance. She is the test, the threshold, the storm before illumination, the archetype that disrupts anyone who attempts to ascend without confronting their own shadow. A magician who fears their desires will be destroyed by them. A magician who understands them can redirect them. In this way, Lilith becomes the ultimate mirror she reveals, whether a seeker's light is real or merely cosmetic. And this is why so many practitioners invoke her not out of lust or devotion, but because she severs the lies one tells oneself. Meanwhile, modern occult revivalists have taken her even further, perceiving her not as a literal entity, but as a cosmic rebel, the feminine force that refuses the roles assigned by divine or human authority. They argue that her demonization is evidence of her power. If she were truly weak or wicked, she would not have been targeted so aggressively across so many cultures. But she was, and that suggests she carries something institutions feared, something they could not allow the masses to access freely. Still, we must be careful not to oversimplify her into a symbol of rebellion alone. In certain occult texts, Lilith is also the guardian of secret knowledge about sexuality. Intuition and life force, the aspects of human experience that religions historically tried to regulate. She is the teacher of sacred autonomy, the embodiment of desire without shame, power without permission, knowledge without gatekeepers. And that is precisely why she is both revered and ferocious, and she gives power, but only to those willing to confront the truth about themselves. Because in the occult worldview, Lilith is not just a figure of darkness, she is the darkness that reveals the light. And no institution, no scripture, no doctrine controls her. In the hidden world, she is not the monster they are. She is the reminder that no amount of censorship can erase a force that originates not from texts, but from the human psyche itself. If Lilith once haunted ancient deserts and medieval manuscripts today, she moves through far more crowded places. Academic circles, feminist literature, psychological theory, online witchcraft communities, astrology apps, music festivals, and even mainstream entertainment. Something unusual has happened in the last century. Lilith has not only returned, she has transformed into a cultural force powerful enough to fracture entire belief systems. But this revival did not happen by accident. It emerged from a collective hunger to reclaim what had been suppressed too long, to retrieve the feminine aspects that patriarchal religion buried under demon masks. In modern feminism, Lilith becomes the archetype of the woman who refuses domestication, the woman who leaves rather than bends, the woman who chooses exile over obedience. She is celebrated as the first symbol of female autonomy in Western myth, a figure who walked away from Adam, from Eden, from the rules designed to confine her. Yet even within feminist circles, Lilith remains complicated. Some embrace her as a heroine of liberation. Others critique the way her symbolism is sometimes reduced to surface-level rebellion, stripped of her deeper psychological and spiritual layers. Because Lilith was never just about freedom. She was about the cost of freedom, The loneliness, the shadow work, the exile, the refusal to participate in systems built on submission. And this is where psychology enters the conversation. Jungian analysts argue that Lilith has resurfaced because the collective psyche is finally ready to confront its buried contradictions. She represents the unintegrated shadow feminine, the traits society labels too much, too emotional, too sexual, too independent. These aspects have been disowned for so long that they have gained a life of their own, returning now, because the human psyche cannot evolve while half of its symbols remain demonized. And so Lilith becomes a psychological necessity, a warning that repression always returns, and usually with greater force. Meanwhile, pop culture has turned Lilith into a mythic icon, appearing in movies, video games, graphic novels, and music as everything from a seductive anti-hero to a cosmic queen. Yet pop culture's obsession with her reveals something deeper. The modern world is struggling to define what feminine power actually looks like when it is no longer contained by traditional roles. Lilith's popularity exposes a cultural vacuum, a need for archetypes that are neither saints nor sinners, neither virgins nor monsters, but complex beings who reflect the full spectrum of human experience. Even astrology transformed her into a celestial archetype. Black Moon Lilith, a point in the lunar orbit associated with raw passion, boundary breaking, and emotional truth. Millions now study their Lilith placement, as if decoding a secret map of the self, revealing where their soul refuses compromise. Yet this revival also raises an uncomfortable question. Is modern culture reclaiming Lilith, or merely repackaging her? Is she being restored to her ancient complexity, or is she becoming another stylized symbol, consumed by aesthetics rather than introspection? The truth lies somewhere in between. On one hand, people are using her story to confront generational trauma, sexual shame, and internalized control narratives. On the other hand, her image is sometimes flattened into a trendy emblem of dark feminine energy, simplified to the point of caricature. But even that distortion says something profound. The world is changing faster than its archetypes can keep up. Lilith is being reinterpreted because humanity is renegotiating. Its relationship with power, sexuality, identity, and spiritual agency. And every time society tries to reclaim or redefine her, she slips through the fingers again, refusing to sit still, refusing to fit the role assigned. In a world hungry for authenticity, yet terrified of its consequences, Lilith stands at the threshold, reminding us that true liberation is neither pretty nor polite, but is real. If the modern world has turned Lilith into an emblem of resistance, then Part 6 forces us to confront a far more unsettling possibility that Lilith is not merely a mythic rebel or a feminist symbol, but the surviving fragment of an ancient cosmic story, older than Judaism, older than the Sumerians, older than any patriarchal system that later sought to control her image. When we peel back the layers of religious propaganda, psychological projection, and cultural reinvention, we find traces of Lilith hidden within a lineage of primordial goddesses whose power shaped entire civilizations before being systematically dismantled. The pattern is unmistakable. Across the ancient Near East, a great mother once reigned, a being who governed life, death, sexuality, intuition, storms, fertility, and the night. She was whole. She was dual. She was both the nurturer and the destroyer, the womb and the storm, the tender guardian and the unpredictable tempest. Then came the rise of male-dominated pantheons, and with them, a deliberate splitting of the feminine into two halves. The acceptable mother, Ishtar. Inanna Isis, Hathor. Astarte, and the dangerous one, Tiamat, Hel Lamia. Medusa, and eventually, Lilith. What religions could admire became goddesses. What they feared became monsters. And in this splitting, Lilith may represent the torn-off shadow of a forgotten cosmic feminine, an archetype exiled so thoroughly that only shards of her remain scattered across myth. Look closely, and the similarities reveal themselves. The serpentine symbolism linking Lilith to the forbidden knowledge of Eden echoes ancient serpent goddesses who guarded wisdom long before the serpent became a symbol of sin. The wings attributed to her reflect older sky mothers who flew through creation myths. Even her association with newborn children hints at an earlier role as a midwife goddess, later inverted into a demon who harmed what she once protected. When a story flips this dramatically, it is rarely a coincidence. It is a suppression. And suppression, this extreme, indicates not evil, but threat. The question is threat. To whom? Perhaps Lilith was not a menace to humanity, but to systems that needed the feminine divided, diminished, and domesticated. In this interpretation, Lilith is the missing half of the goddess archetype, the side that patriarchal religion feared because it empowered women to act outside prescribed roles. But her relevance extends far beyond feminism. She embodies the uncomfortable truth that every human being, regardless of gender, carries an inner wildness that cannot be systematized. She represents instinct desire, rage, intuition, spiritual agency, and the mysterious parts of consciousness that organized religion tried to sanitize. To encounter Lilith is to confront the parts of yourself you were taught to fear. The pieces declared dark, unacceptable, or dangerous because they threatened someone else's control. In this sense, Lilith is not a mythic figure at all. She is a psychological force, a cosmic archetype, a symbolic key to the parts of the self lost through centuries of cultural censorship. And this reframing explains something crucial, why she never truly disappears. Every time society shifts, every time an old system crumbles, every time a new spiritual or psychological awakening begins, Lilith returns because the human psyche cannot evolve, while one half of its symbols is locked in exile. She reemerges not as a demon, not as a goddess, but as a reminder. The feminine is not complete without its shadow. Creation is not complete without its chaos. And humanity is not complete without the truth it tried to bury. So the real question is, not who is Lilith, but what part of ourselves have we abandoned, and what would happen if we dared to reclaim it? For Lilith's true face is not found in any myth, scripture, or ritual. It is found in the silent recognition that the darkness we fear is often the freedom we need. As we come to the end of this journey, through thousands of years of myth, fear projection, and reinvention, one truth begins to rise from the ashes of all the versions we have examined. Lilith was never a demon hiding in the darkness. She was the darkness we were forbidden to understand. Every culture that touched her reshaped her into whatever it most feared, whatever it most desired, whatever it most needed to control. And in that shifting, contradictory portrait, we see something profound. Lilith is less an ancient figure and more a psychological compass, pointing toward the parts of humanity that institutions tried hardest to suppress. Whether she appears as Adam's rebellious first wife, a winged night spirit, a seductress of dreams, a queen of the Qliphoth, a feminist icon, or a cosmic archetype, the deeper pattern remains unchanged. She is the embodiment of autonomy in a world terrified of autonomous women. She is the voice of desire in systems that prefer silence. She is the mirror reflecting every shadow we refuse to claim. But perhaps the most revealing detail is not how she was demonized. Millions of figures have been demonized throughout history. What sets Lilith apart is how she refused to disappear. She survived every erasure, every forbidden text, every moral warning, every fearful sermon. She survived in the footnotes of folklore, in the margins of manuscripts, in the nightmares of those who created her, and now in the consciousness of a world rediscovering what it lost. Her persistence is a message. If an archetype endures for 5,000 years, despite relentless suppression, it is because it holds something the human psyche cannot live without. And what Lilith holds is not evil. It is wholeness. She is the reminder that the feminine cannot be divided into light and dark, acceptable and forbidden, mother and monster. She is the reminder that power does not vanish when you exile it. It becomes stronger, sharper, and more honest. And she is the reminder that the dark parts of ourselves, our desires, our boundaries, our instincts, our refusal to shrink, are not sins, but essential threads in the fabric of who we are meant to become. So who is Lilith really? She is the unanswered question at the center of every story about control. She is the unbroken voice inside every person who has been told to stay small. She is the shadow that does not threaten your light, but completes it. And she is the quiet truth that every empire, every religion, and every ideology tried to bury. That liberation begins the moment we stop fearing the parts of ourselves that were never meant to be tamed. Lilith is not the monster at the edge of the firelight. She is the flame that refuses to go out.